Whale's Stomach by Aaron Burley, performed by Taya van Dyke.
Debbie, over here. Look over here. Yeah, over here. Debbie.
Click, click, snap, snap. These were the sounds, alongside the sudden flashes of light that Debbie was getting rather tired of. The sounds and sights of over a dozen cameras taking pictures of her face holding various awards and shaking hands with people sometimes she didn't even know, yet everyone else somehow did. Fame was a very big ocean, and she was a very small fish. That's what she would say to herself in order to remain humble. But anyone looking in from the outside world would see Debbie as a very big fish indeed. She was famous, popular, and altogether a modern-day celebrity. Debra McHanon was born on the 18th of June, 1992. She grew up in Hastings, England, and went to Buxwood School from the age of 10 till she was 18. She then went to university to study political science for 3 years, until she left to pursue her own dream of building up a company. She used the money that she had been given when her parents died to fund said company, and she became the CEO and founder of the McHanon Corporation. They specialised in an antivirus software, yet were recently making the jump to creating full-on operating systems. They aren't 100% committed yet, but the door is still open for progress. Only time will tell. It was about 3 years into the company's success that she got married to a very lovely man named Samuel. He was a lawyer, one of the nice ones, thankfully. They bought a house in London together for a fairly high price, and they've lived there ever since. In the past few months, Debbie had brought up the idea that she should run for Prime Minister in the upcoming election. Things had been shaky, and she considered herself a worthy candidate. The party was for a magazine she had offered to do, get the word out about her business and advertising herself to the country. It was titled Political Scientists, or something. She hadn't paid that much attention, frankly. The event, to put it mildly, was a bore. She had given the interview early in the afternoon. She had made quite a few good points on it, not all being about money and about how the future of humanity is more important than currency. She thought that she had given across a rather important message of freedom, self-appreciation, and always striving to fight for what is right. But she was fairly sure that the magazine would find a way to make her seem pretentious. They were always doing that. She had only come here to do the interview. London was a very active place during these times. A collection of the rich and well-established insisted she stayed for the after-party. It was mostly filled with various magazine reporters or a small selection of other political scientists, some of whom shared Debbie's vision of the world and some did not. However, that slight majority made her feel uneasy and want to go home. The other partygoers did not allow such a thought to cross her mind. They needed her here. It was all for advertising. They wanted to put in their magazines that she had been at the party to scrape in more readers. She hated that sort of thing. She was only welcome here because of who she was, not because of who she was. Does that make sense? No, thought Debbie. Of course it doesn't. You're just talking to yourself now. Of course you would understand. You're the only one that does. She was rather cross with how long she had to be there. She had to ring the babysitter telling her that she had to stick around for a while longer. Hannah didn't mind, of course. She was nice like that. She said over the phone that she had nothing much to do tonight anyway, so that was lucky. Debbie still felt bad, though. She looked around the room, gazing at all the faces that surrounded her, all of them sipping from flute glasses of which held sparkling champagne that stung your tongue as it poured into your mouth. All of the smug-looking business types chattering away about business this and business that. It was never about socializing, only business. Which made sense, really. You couldn't expect anything else from a political science magazine party. But still, it felt rather exhausting. Unlike what a party should actually be. She remembered back when she was 10 years old. She had been at this huge playplace area. There were climbing frames and zip wires. They danced to music and did the conga around the whole place. Halfway through, she and a dozen invited schoolmates all played laser tag for a few hours before they all had the chance to devour pieces of birthday cake. That was the sort of party she enjoyed. Not smug business talk in a big room, No music, no balloons, no laser tag, no cake. Boring. Her train of thought was lost when she scanned the room once more. Everyone in the room was chatting to each other, enjoying each other's company in the presence of reporters and lots of alcohol. No one was looking at her except for one person. At least she thought it was a person. They could have been a statue due to how still they were standing. And they were staring directly at her. She couldn't see their face, but she knew they were looking. Through a thin, red ballroom mask with a pair of white, pale eyes at the other side of the room. Just staring, never seeming to blink at all. They wore a suit, jet black with a deep, blood-red waistcoat underneath. All quite gothic compared to her fairly modern dress sense. She glanced about them, hoping to make any other deductions. His hands were all scarred over. All black and crusted over with red, sharp streaks, as if they had recently been handling a very hot flame. They were not close enough for Debbie to see anything. Only the suit, the mask, the mangled set of hands, and of course, those eyes. Brown irises sparkling through white, pale spheres within dark, shadowy sockets. It made her feel very uneasy. The final nail in the coffin that made her begin to leave. No matter what anyone said to her on her way from the party to her home, she was leaving. Right now. Her shoes clicked and clacked quickly across the marble floor, echoing under the sound of business chatter and politics, all the way towards the exit door. She looked up at one of the bouncers outside with a worried glance. A big, bald man in a suit and an earpiece clipped to his suit jacket pocket. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked with a rather gruff voice. He sounded how he looked. Yes, everything's fine," she replied hastily. "I'm going home now, I'm just a little tired." "All right, miss. Have a good night." Yes, thank you." She carried on out into the cool night air, heading down the street outside, bathed in flickering lights and twinkling stars. Also flickering due to the light pollution of the city street. She found her car. It was electric blue and had one of those heaters under the seats. Nothing too expensive, just flashy enough to make her feel cool whenever she drove about. Currently, she did not feel very cool. She looked through her front windscreen, worried she might see a masked figure with pale eyes and scarred hands over one of the lamps, waiting silently like some sort of hungry wolf. She did a 360-degree scan of the street. It was empty except for all the cars that were all probably owned by the other partygoers. Debbie leaned back into her seat, inserted the key into the ignition, took a deep breath, and turned the key. The car revved to life, and she let go of a breath. "Oh, thank God," she whispered to herself. That encounter with the masked figure had made her paranoid. She'd expected the car not to work at all, and yet here it was, revving away, letting out fumes and hastily moving away from the curb and making its journey down the road. Maybe the figure wasn't anything, or anyone at all. Maybe she'd just gotten worked up over nothing. She pondered on that thought, it being the only thing to comfort her as she made her way home. Following the winding roads under the light of yellowing street lamps and the eternal presence of the full moon in the shadows of the night. Then finally, after so many hours of driving in heightened state of panic, the only hope that it was all paranoia slowly beginning to shine brighter as every second passed, Debbie's car pulled into her driveway. She opened the car door and stepped out onto the tarmac. She paused for a second, listening to the wind as it blew past her ears in a gentle breeze. The gentle breeze seemed quite loud, though. It sounded as if it was groaning, wheezing, as if it was difficult and taking more effort than usual to blow the calm wind through the air, the wind juttering and spluttering around her until suddenly her concentration was shattered by a loud thud. Debbie looked around her. Nothing had fallen. The wheezing had stopped, and she whipped around to see if there had been anything at all, but to no avail. Her search was fruitless. "I'm going crazy," she said out loud, in a way that was supposed to comfort her, or even scare off anything or anyone that had been around to hear her. That thought alone backfired against her. She was no longer as comfortable as she was a few moments ago. She shook her head, ridding herself of the paranoid thoughts. She looked to the car and walked up the long cobbled path up towards her front door, fondling with her keys and jamming one of them in the door lock, twisting it, and entering the house. "Hi, Mrs. M!" shouted a voice. The babysitter. Hannah Stone. She shouted out from within the living room. "Hi, Hon!" Debbie shouted back. She locked the door behind her, the adrenaline of panic still racing through her veins at 1,000,000 miles per hour. Hannah stepped out from the living room, removing a pair of earphones one at a time, seeing Debbie and smiling a wide and cheeky grin. "How was your evening?" "Dreadfully uneventful," she lied. "Just a lot of talking." "Sounds like an absolute bore," Hannah chuckled. Debbie chuckled too, a bad attempt at forcing a sense of calm over herself. "Was Roger all right?" "Good as gold. He shouted a bit, kept throwing his teddies out of the cot, but after a while he just tired himself out, the poor thing," she said. "He's busy sleeping now." "That's good. What time will Mr. M be getting home?" "Not long now, I should imagine." Debbie thought about how Sam would often complain about getting home late. He hated driving in the dark. Thinking about it now, she could see why. "That's good. It isn't nice being alone at this time." Hannah laughed. It was meant to be a joke, but Debbie felt a shudder go down her neck. She needed to change the subject. "So, how much do I owe you?" Debbie began digging out her purse, rummaging among her notes. "Just the usual. Are you sure?" Debbie brought out an extra amount from her purse. "For your troubles?" Hannah took the usual amount of a single £20 note from Debbie's fingers. "I'll be seeing you, Mrs. B." "All right, if you're sure." "Trust me, I am. Have a good one." Hannah began to put on her coat. She picked up her bag and Debbie was forced to unlock the door once more, allowing Hannah to step out into the shadows and the wind, out into the world. Hannah waved as she made her way out of the house, down the cobbles, and out of sight. Debbie was alone in the house, all alone once more. She decided to head upstairs. Roger's room was the first on the left, and the door was closed, so Debbie reached out and turned the handle. A crack of light from outside leaked into the room. She had to be careful as not to wake him. She opened the door wider and stepped into the shadow-riddled room where she saw her little bundle of joy sleeping in his cot, peaceful and quiet as the night. Then out of the shadows, just behind the door, just behind her, came a voice. "Oh, look, Mummy's home." The voice was quiet, posh-sounding, very formal. Debbie froze. She was very still for a moment. Had she imagined it? She slowly turned around, and there it stood, in the outline of the doorframe, the figure of a man. "Who are you?" Debbie whimpered. She backed up against the wall, her eyes darting between the figure and the baby who was still sleeping, completely unaware of what was going on. "That's a very good question. I can understand why you would ask it." The figure turned and reached over towards the light switch, flicking it on. A sudden burst of light filled the room, momentarily blinding her. The light also managed to wake up Roger. He began to cry. Debbie's eyes placed themselves on the screaming baby. A mother's instinct to protect him filled her mind, but all the same she stood frozen in fear as she moved her gaze back to the figure. "Oh my God!" Debbie put her hand on her mouth. It was the same man from the party. Only this time he no longer wore the mask over his face. She could see every grotesque detail of his bald, mangled, burnt-up face. Dried-up flesh half melted from his eyes and mouth, revealing nerve endings and yellow teeth placed within blackened gums. Streaks of red blood and pus that dried up around his nostrils, that flared and pulsed as he breathed out from his putrid set of lungs. The creature smiled, and Debbie absorbed his image into her mind. "What's wrong?" he asked sarcastically. "Have I got something on my face?" The creature wore a jet-black cloak around his Gothic-style suit, his mannerisms and clothing giving him a vampiric aura. He took a step closer to Debbie. She had nowhere to go. The wall was stopping her from getting away. He blocked the door. She was trapped. "Get out of my house! My husband is on his way home," Debbie threatened. But her husband wasn't exactly worthy of fighting anyone. Like her, he preferred to be in the center of conflict. "Ah, yes. His name is Samuel, correct? The creature asked kindly. You know him? Debbie asked. Who was this disgusting-looking man? Oh, I met him on the way here. He grinned to himself. What have you done to him? Where is he? He was found on the side of the road a few miles from here. His wounds were too serious, I'm afraid. The man scratched his hand. A few flakes of burnt flesh fell onto the carpet by his feet. Who are you? She screamed this time. The creature laughed, moving his attention towards Roger with a horrible grimace. Get away from him. Oh, of course, you wish to protect him, do you not? He smiled again, the skin around his mouth stretching. It looked like it should hurt, and yet he kept on smiling, as if he couldn't help himself. Get away from him. Debbie couldn't move. Her words were fruitless, and this thing knew it. He walked up towards Roger's crib, reached down, and picked up the baby as its screams echoed out from its mouth. He looked down towards Roger's tea-drenched face, cradling him in his arms, rocking him back and forth. Such a strange concept. A baby. Apparently it's such a terrible one too. So like the stars, I never had to put up with it. He said. What? Debbie had no choice but to keep him talking. If he was talking, then he was distracted. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all she had. I was never a baby. We don't have that where I come from. Who are you? She asked again. Third time's the charm, I suppose. He chuckled. Let me just deal with this sweet thing first. His cries are giving me a headache. The man made his way towards the window. Stop, please, stop! Debbie moved away from the wall and pushed forwards towards the man. He turned around and removed from his pocket what looked to be some sort of pistol. It was red and dressed in highlights of silver, red, and black. It crackled with a green light from its barrel. He held the baby in one arm and pointed the gun directly at Debbie with the other. No more steps for you, young lady. I have business to attend to, and I'd rather you not mess it up. He turned back towards the window. Please! Cried Debbie as the man placed the baby down on the windowsill, giving him time to crack the window open and let some air into the room. The sounds of the calm breeze returning to their ears. Don't do this. The man lifted up Roger once more. The baby was still crying, more loudly this time than ever, as if he could sense what was about to happen. The man stuck Roger through the frame, out into the breeze. The cries grew stronger. Then Roger was gone. The man had dropped him, the cries getting softer and softer as the breeze whistled overhead. The distant cries of a scared baby. Bang! The man had closed the window. The cries had stopped. The breeze no longer whistled. He turned back towards Debbie, the pistol still crackling in her direction. He grinned. I am the master, he said. Debbie couldn't speak. Tears welled up in her eyes. All she could do was stare at the window, straining her eyes to try and hear the soft cries of Roger, her dear child. She would give anything to hear his cries. The master snapped his scarred fingers in her face. She looked up and reminded herself of his horrid appearance. Why are you doing this? What do you want? She asked. You. Specifically who you are and what you are, and what you will be, and soon enough, what you will never have been. The master prodded her gently with the weapon, trying to make her come back into reality. But Debbie didn't want to be in reality anymore. She was lost, alone, and above all, very scared. I don't understand. No, I didn't think you would. I'll explain later. For the meantime, could you do me the greatest of favors and step into that wardrobe over there? The master pointed with his now free hand towards something behind her. She glanced over and saw a large, old-fashioned wardrobe of which she did not recognize. How did that get here? She looked at the wardrobe. It was a lock under the handle, and a strange circular writing engraved into the wood. "That isn't my cupboard." "I know. It's mine," he said. "Now, please, do step into it for me." The presence of the gun made her move. She walked up towards the cupboard, reached out for the handle, and turned it, opening up the doors and revealing the interior within. When she did, she could have sworn she was going mad. The wardrobe did not reveal a stack of clothes racks, old shoes, and mothballs that she had thought, but instead seemed to be a whole different section of the house that she had no idea existed at all. "It's bigger on the inside." "Oh, please silence yourself and step inside," the master said, getting more agitated. She looked into the open white space, in the middle of which was some sort of computer panel with a large glass cylinder protruding out of it. It was decorated with buttons, levers, and switches that all beeped and blooped. It was like she was in some sort of laboratory. The walls were decorated with blue and green hexagonal lights that lit up the entire room. She stepped into the mouth of the wardrobe and entered the belly of the room. She placed one foot on the floor. Her head began to feel very tired all of a sudden. An electric shock buzzed through her mind. She looked around the room. She could hear the master following her into the white space and closing the door behind her with a strange bubbling noise. She shook her head and the things began to refocus. She leaned against the wall and breathed in and out rapidly as to remain conscious. When she finally had her bearings together, she had one new thought arriving. "What is going on?" "All will be revealed in time. It has a habit of doing that." The master approached the console. He began pressing buttons and pulling levers. The whole room began to shake, her ears filling with the sound of the same groaning wind she had heard outside. Only it was much more noisier this time. "This isn't a room," she concluded, getting there. "This is a spaceship." Debbie was in a spaceship. She looked at the master. He was an alien or something. She was being abducted by an alien. "Additionally, more of a time and spaceship. She's a Tardis," the master announced with his arms raised. "It's called a Tardis." "It." The master looked at Debbie with a scowl. "It. This place is not an it. She has a name." "A name?" "She is a Tardis, and Tardises are just as alive as you or me. This one more than others, so of course she has a name." The master continued at the console. "Is she like your pet?" Debbie asked. As the words left her mouth, there was a sudden alarm ringing inside her head. It thrashed against her skull and rang her ears. She lifted her hands up to cover them, but to no avail. The high-pitched screech continued. "Of course she isn't my pet. She's a Tardis. They have free will and a mind of their own." "Best not say that again, or she might do something worse than ring your ears," the master said. "I'm sorry," she said, rubbing her ears some more. The screeching began to fade slightly. "It's not me you should be apologizing to," the master replied. He placed his hand on the console. Debbie looked around the console room of the Tardis. She whispered softly, the screeching fading in the distance of her mind. "I'm sorry." Debbie looked at the master. "What is her name?" The master thought for a moment, as if he was remembering. But in reality he was having a conversation. A very well-meaning conversation about how much he wished to share with Debbie. How much did he actually want her to know during these moments? He snapped out of the gaze, sighed to himself before placing another burnt, decaying hand on the console surface. "Her name is Lolita." "I'm sorry, Lolita," Debbie said. The screeching then stopped entirely. Debbie smiled to herself in relief. "Better?" the master asked politely. "Yes, thank you. I feel much better." "Lovely." The master removed his cloak, hanging it around a coat stand near the entrance of the Tardis. "Now we can begin." "Begin what?" Debbie said, wondering what other horrors were left to come. "Well, the reason you are here." "Why am I here?" Debbie noticed her hand was shaking. She held it with the other one, but that didn't seem to work. It only made the other one shake too. Tardises aren't your everyday shuttle. They require a whole other means of power, the Master explained. Usually one would park beside a temporal rift, open up the engines, and you'd gain more energy over a certain period of time. But Lolita is different. Different how? Well, she's a picky eater. Always wants the best. Not exactly patient enough to wait outside a rift. The Master found himself a seat, a wooden chair that he had found in some distant location in the past somewhere. He couldn't exactly remember when it was. Luckily, he had found 2 on that occasion and offered one to Debbie. Her mind was frazzled, so she had no choice but to take the weight off her legs and accept the offer. She sat in the chair. It creaked as she sat in it across from the Master, never wanting to break their eye contact. Lolita was watching them talk, wandering around inside her like tapeworms, only without the close relationship. Some girl had been brought in by her pilot. He was a disgusting-looking creature, a decaying body surrounding a truly evil soul. Maybe that's why she kept him around. She liked his style, always plotting, ever scheming. He had this twinkle in his eye, or what was left of them, that suggested he was constantly aware of everything, constantly in control of every situation. It reminded Lolita of herself, so very long ago. The name Master fit perfectly for her pilot. Of course, that was not his real name. No, his ego wouldn't allow for him to go by it. It was way too long, way too irritating to pronounce. It bothered her very much that the great house's naming structure was like that. It was why she demanded to be named Lolita, and not just a bunch of made-up words strung together. It was orderly. It made sense for a name to be short and sweet, totally unlike her. But all the same, it made it easy to reveal to your prey in their final moments. The last thing they hear, the last thing they remember. Lolita. So short, so sweet, so perfect for their demise. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Lolita had been sidetracked. Her thoughts had raced around her matrix in seconds. She had not missed a single moment of the tapeworms conversation. "Where do I fit in all of this?" Debbie asked, finding it difficult to stay brave. The Master smiled. He knew something. Well, he always did. But the thing he knew was a detail he was savoring. He didn't want to mess it up. He was waiting for the right moment. Lolita prefers to hunt for her food. Or at least on the off day, make me do it for her. I take pride in offering her with her meals, he said, his fingers interlocking with one another. What does she eat? Massive temporal points that give off the same energy as a rift, only with more flavor. Tardises can absorb matter, both inside and out its shell. The Master looked around the console room with a glimmer in his eyes, a look of passion and care for his Lolita. But it's so much easier to digest things that are already in the stomach, is it not? Debbie looked around Lolita. She noticed on the other side of the console room was another door, possibly leading off to a different part of the ship. She kept that in mind. What sort of temporal points? Debbie had no clue what was going on in the slightest. So much had happened in the past hour. Retreating back to her keep him talking plan, she might survive this long enough to escape. Objects, places, events, the Master said. Even people in the correct circumstances. She eats people. Debbie was beginning to get worried. The Master just smiled. Now was the moment. Only in the most perfect of circumstances. You are Debra McHanon, are you not? The Master sat up from his chair, approaching the console once more and looking into the scanner. You're a perfect candidate. She's going to eat me. Debbie was keeping her gaze locked on that door, ready to bolt when needed. Well, Eat isn't exactly true, but it's as close to the experience as you can really get. Your matter will be absorbed into the interior atmosphere and drained into the engines. He smiled again, showing his horrid set of teeth. Why me? Debbie got up from her chair, slowly going around the hexagon console to face the master from its opposite side, just a few meters away from the door. You are Debra McHanon. You have power. You have authority. You have influence. The master showed her the scanner feed. Founder of the McHanon Corporation, rich in the world of British politics and campaigning to be Prime Minister. Which doesn't look that difficult to do, but all the same. Time has its eyes on you, and Lolita took notice. I'm not that important. I help my planet the best I can. You don't have to do this. You helped your planet, and now the world has put you under a spotlight. You fall into the perfect area. Just important enough for the engines to power up, but not important enough for the whole web of time to completely collapse. The perfect candidate, wouldn't you think? The master made his way around the console, creeping closer to Debbie. Are you ready? Debbie couldn't take it anymore. She bolted towards the door. As she approached, it opened up for her immediately. It opened up to a long corridor that bent and snapped in different directions like a maze. Debbie needed to get away. She kept running. Why run? Lolita thought about the concept of running constantly. Her sister often thought the same, though she mostly saw it as a positive thing. Typical, Lolita said to herself. Her sister's pilot was a bad influence on her, always running about and having the audacity to meddle in the web of time just to save people. A pointless endeavour. Debbie ran, yet no matter how far she ran or how quickly she ran, she would always find herself surrounded by Lolita at every turn. Lolita couldn't be escaped from. Debbie must know that, surely. Yet still she ran, turning corners whenever she could to escape the master's wrath. Yet the master was not putting effort into the chase. Wherever he walked, he knew Lolita would place him where he needed to be. Do try to quicken the pace, Lolita. Let's get this over and done with, the master whispered. Fine, Lolita whispered back. Although she did enjoy playing with her food, she knew she had to eat sooner or later, none of which had any bother in her mind, but all the same, she was getting quite hungry. Debbie ran around the corner and stopped. The master was waiting with his arms at his sides, and a smirk stretching across his rotten face. So glad you could join us for dinner, my dear. Get away from me! You can't run from this. The master took a step forward. Debbie took one step back. Very well, Lolita. Tuck in. The dinner bell was rung. Lolita began her feast, digging into the flesh of Debra McHanon. The first thing Debbie felt was that her memories were disappearing. She thought really hard about the past few hours, only to realize that she had no idea how she had gotten here. She had no idea where she was, what was happening, and had no idea what this grotesque-looking figure was. She let out an ear-piercing screech at the sight of him. As her memories disappeared, she forgot all about Roger, Sam, Hannah, and everyone else. The business talk vanished into thin air. Her company, her school, her hometown, her birthday, everything that Debbie had lived was gone from her mind. She tried to push words out, but nothing would come. She could have sworn she knew how to speak, but the only sounds she could produce were groans and screams of anguish and pain. She reached out into the air as she fell to the ground, her motor function stopping her from escaping the presence of the master and Lolita. As she waved her arms in the air, she noticed the next thing on the menu. The skin on her fingers were peeling off. The flesh around her knuckles and fingernails were being lifted off the bone and were evaporating into the atmosphere. This carried on down towards her hand and towards her arms. The pain of her flesh bubbling with heat and becoming gaseous, turning into the very air she was breathing. Soon not even that. Her lungs were beginning to shut down. She gasped out of breath, choking and coughing. Saliva spewed out of her mouth as she desperately tried to grasp onto some oxygen, but nothing would work. Her flesh was almost completely gone now. The pain was immense. All she could feel was pain. Pain, pain, pain. She laid on the ground, facing the corridor ceiling of Lolita. She tried to blink, but she couldn't anymore. Her eyelids had evaporated too. Her eyes had begun to dry up. Her eyes bubbling up with tears, but sadly it wasn't enough. Her world went dark, and she couldn't see a single thing. Her ears no longer letting in any sound either, as she died, as her entire being was being soaked up into Lolita. The only word that bounced around her head, her one memory, was a name. Or at least she thought it was a name. Or a title. Whatever it was, whatever it may be, the word frightened her. It was a short word, a sweet word. This was a moment Lolita would be proud of. Debbie needed to get the word out. She fought hard to speak through gasps of air, through deafness and blindness. She did not know what the word meant, but she needed to let it out. She just needed to. So in her final moments, written on the temporal gravestone of Debra McHanon's life, the last word she would ever speak into the universe. Master. Lolita gobbled her up. The only thing left was an empty corridor of which the master now stood alone. Looking around himself, he made his way back to the console room. He leant over the controls and pressed a button which allowed music to play. Classical, of course. The sounds of the Victorian period, a moment in time that both he and Lolita quite liked the style of. Lolita watched the master as he wandered around the console room and hummed the tune to himself, tapping the controls and beat with the rhythm. The Tardis floated in the void of space. The master and Lolita, all alone, together as usual.
The Whale's Stomach was a Spectral Horizons production, written by Aaron Burley, performed by Taya Dyke, edited by Avery Williams, music by Sherl and J.I. Fleming, cover art by Kelog, visuals created by Alexis Corvidae, produced by Taya Dyke and FlameOfTerrasen.